last work by Duchamp, which is our threshold to surrealism. It's a ton donné in French. It means the given. And the given it involves the illuminating gas and the water wheel as well. Let's move ahead in my work so we get to it, the waterfall. So you can see it's the same size as the large glass, only it's everything the large glass wasn't. Instead of being transparent, it is opaque. It is an old Spanish door. It's material. The large glass is so abstract. And this work is so constructed material, weighty wood. It has two little holes to peek through, so only one viewer at a time, one voyeur at a time. And what you see on the other side is the bride stripped bare and fallen. She holds up her illuminating gas lantern, so there's the idea of her illuminating gasoline or love gasoline, and there is a water wheel over here that's like that sleigh that was moving. But she is fallen, she is stripped bare. This is work that has sometimes been really hated by some feminists who see it as a work about rape. But what we see is a very cryptic work that hangs in direct relation to large glass. And he leaves us, I think this is so typical of Duchamp, he leaves us hovering between the two. Between this idea of the bride never completely stripped bare, and this one, which we either have to look at as, well, checkmate, he's captured the queen, or we look at ourselves as actually in the in-between, trying to make sense of this. And that's an endgame situation. That's his name for the book on chess he wrote, Endgame. It is what many postmodernists see as the motto of our own day, an endgame situation, where everything's already been done, and everything, that's what happens in a chess game where there's no new moves possible. It's like a stalemate. But you could think of it as a kind of hovering between two different poles. Now that is our threshold to surrealism. This idea of, in all surrealism, of a threshold between an inner and an outer world, an inner and an outer reality. A kind of physical reality out there and a psychological reality within. It's going to constantly play on the eye that looks out and the inner eye, the inner person. So constantly working with this sort of oppositional boundaries of these two different worlds, of the world of reason, of waking, of logic, of taking an exam, as opposed to the world of sleeping and dreaming and fantasizing. And in most surrealist works, what they try to do is balance those two worlds so they coexist. And it's pointing toward a surreality as a reality in some sense that transcends the limits of reason. Because what they keep describing is a world of mystery, enigmas, that reason alone can never fully explain. And that's where surrealism steps in. All right, yeah.
Are you suggesting that this in-between state that the given exists in only really exists in relationship to a comparison against the large glass?
I would never, ever fix it in any one way, but I do think it definitely exists in relation to that work.
Yes.
Do I say it only exists in relation to that work? No, because when you're standing in front of it, staring into it, it's you and that work. But yeah, with the Dadaist and with someone as smart as Duchamp, I'm never going to say, oh yes, this is what it means. But he leaves us, he doesn't have any notes for this work, at least none that have come out yet. So, you know, he leaves us thinking about how this hangs in relation to that. And it's such a different way of making art, because this is a real physical, material installation.
So then how does it operate for someone who, say, for instance, hasn't seen the large glass?
Well, one of the things is that if you go see them in person, you can't see one without the other.
Okay.
The only way you can get, I need to point, the only way you can get to this, you go into the room where the large glass is after you've seen his earlier works, and then there's a doorway into one more room, and it's the only way into that room, and the only way out of that room is through this. So I think it's more this way. I think the only way in and out of surrealism is through Duchamp's looking glass. So mirrors, windows, doorways in surrealism, don't expect them to behave according to the outer world of physical reality. Mirrors will only kind of reflect your inner psyche instead of your outer appearance. Windows are not just clean-cut extensions of our world. And doorways always lead to more questions and more doorways needing to open. So Surrealism is going to very much go back to sort of what Redon did earlier, de Chirico did. They're going to respect the world as a strange museum of things. They're going to respect the mystery and the wonder about things. They're not really going to decode it. They're never going to demystify it. They're going to try and, if Dada wants to keep you critically thinking, Surrealism wants to open you up to poetic ways of thinking beyond bourgeois moral preoccupations, beyond rational mindsets. They are interested in that poetry of the unconscious, and of course, because they're the first movement to read the Freud. This is the first movement that truly was influenced by Freud. André Breton, the guy who writes the manifesto, he was an abnormal psych major who wanted to be a psychoanalyst. But he went and met Freud, and Freud didn't seem to think that Breton was a great genius, and so Breton didn't think Freud then was such a great genius. So there was, but he was studying that when he went to war. You know, when the war happened, World War I happened. So you know he goes this other way, becomes a surrealist. But you can see it's a movement picking up on the discoveries of the unconscious, and this is the moment, you know, in academia still today, desire. The geography of desire is an academic terrain, you know, to start to understand what is desire, how does that operate. So you see this movement really taking on that idea of desire. I've done some things for you that I've never done before. I've added some text because I wanted to kind of hit some of those key points for you. And of course I had to take the most difficult font style, but it seemed appropriate. The anatomy of desire. Now, we're looking at Picasso. He's not a card-carrying member of the Surrealists, but he's an invited guest. And he certainly has a Surrealist period, I think, that locates right around 1932, when he meets Marie Therese Voltaire, that young girl. And Girl Before Mirror is a classic kind of Surrealist threshold imagery, right? You have an inner and an outer world. You have a psyche mirror. That's what they're actually called, these pivot mirrors, and it reflects a very different appearance. So you have a face that looks like a giant sun, and then a face that looks more like a lunar orb, like a moon. You have a face, you have a body that looks like, well, maybe it's wearing a striped bathing suit, or you know, something like that on the outside, and then you have this body that seems all completely about fertility and erotic swaying body. So this idea of inner and outer realities continually in play between waking and sleeping. Surrealism will constantly work that kind of terrain. In this work, what we have is the sleeping muse, his girlfriend, the 17-year-old girlfriend, and then on the other side we have the grotesque body. That would be the wife, who he's becoming more and more estranged from. And you can see that Surrealism can pitch itself as a wet dream or as a nightmare. And that's the surreal marvelous. So you can see, again, the anatomy of desire, of looking at the body as a desiring subject, and also as a desired object. All right, beauty will be convulsive or will not be at all. The idea of convulsive beauty, that is a strange definition of beauty. Certainly not classical beauty, which is supposed to be composed and harmonious. Convulsive beauty is one that's spasmodic and irrational. And so beauty will be convulsive, fits with Breton's idea, he wrote that, he wrote this statement, l'amour fou, crazy love, crazy love. So our surrealists were always open for crazy love encounters. So this idea of what takes you beyond bourgeois preoccupations with being the proper middle class. So this is about opening up, and they called what they did the Surrealist Revolution. It was a revolution to open up the mind, specifically looking at dreams, looking at things from the unconscious. The idea of woman is the most marvelous and disturbing problem of all. You don't need to know these images, but but I'm trying to give you the philosophy behind the movement. You do need to know that. You need to get at not just identifying artists as part of that movement, but you need to be able to articulate the ideas of that movement. So woman is the most marvelous and disturbing problem of all means the surreal marvelous can be explained by woman because woman is the incarnation of mystery. She is the kind of epitome of mystery. And they want to keep her mysterious, and they want to keep her disturbed, because to them, that makes her more marvelous. Remember, their sense of marvelous, or their sublime senses, it can be anything from that wet dream, something beautiful, to something horrific. So it's whatever shakes up your bourgeois mentality. So it can have a range. So they celebrate hysteria. They celebrate the anniversary of hysteria. They call hysteria some of the most beautiful poetry of the 19th century. So this idea of hysterics is a form of convulsive beauty. Now I'm trying to give you tools that you can use to contextualize these works of art instead of just calling them strange and bizarre. You know, we throw that term surreal around so loosely today. You're talking about surreal with a capital S, a particular movement that happened at a particular time that had a particular doctrine and beliefs. So you want to be able to kind of really understand it instead of just using it as a term for anything that is bizarre. An underlying emotional disturbance is one of the points of surrealism, this idea of hysteria, playing on it. This is Dali playing on those photo archives of actual patients, hysteric patients in the 19th century. So this idea that there is an underlying emotional disturbance is so different from the idea of an underlying order. It's so different from this idea of building toward a kind of utopian age built on conscious, calculated, let's use machine technology, we'll build a brave new world. This is saying you're forgetting about the unconscious. And surrealism never will. So what is surrealism? There is André Breton, who wrote the manifestos. He gives his definitions. You can go back to those definitions. He talked about a point where contradictions cease to appear contradictory, where we get, opposites kind of coexisting, inner and outer worlds. One of the key aspects is Freudian dream logic. The idea that dreams are not the opposite of logic, they just have their own logic. Based on, and we tried to really get you to learn these from early on, displacement, condensation, and fetish. The Rape, a painting by Magritte, is a great way to learn that. And if you're having trouble with those concepts, go to this in the computer tutorial. It's all spelled out. But displacement, when your pubic hair is not where it's supposed to be. Condensation, when your face and your erogenous zones are combined together. And fetish, the whole fetishizing of the woman as a disturbing sexual object, as a raped object. Psychic automatism. That's another key point. Psychic automatism. Learn that term. It means, we would say stream of consciousness, but that's their term. We owe it to them to use their term. Psychic automatism. Where you put your psyche on automatic pilot, where you refuse to control it with reason. Where you confuse to consciously control it, where you open yourself up to the stream of consciousness, to that flow, what they call the undirected play of thought. Just let your thoughts go where they will. And this they consider to be the poetry of the unconscious, the poetry of the unconscious. So remember, they're not so keyed into protest, deconstructive protest. This is reconstructive. How can we use chance as a starting point to create the poetry of the unconscious? So this is yet another idea behind them. And then the idea of that surreal marvelous, which always implies something underlying that's disturbing, or a kind of slippage in the system, formless. Now the Exquisite Cadaver, we did that poem. You kind of experienced that poem of how it starts one way and then it keeps changing and no one mind's rational faculties can control the outcome. And they feel something wonderful will emerge, something from the unconscious will surface. And so that's the reconstructive poetry of chance. All right, Max Ernst, first artist you need to know. If it is a bird and it's surreal, it's Max Ernst. Max Ernst is our photo montage example, too, from Surrealism, where we see how it's different from Cut with a Kitchen Knife. We see it is kind of seamless, and he uses the bird as a symbol of eroticism, seduction. So Birdman coming home to the proper bourgeois Victorian parlor, everything starts to run amok, and pretty soon you get convulsive beauty. So this was his photo montage book that he did in 1933 when Hitler took power, and he knew what that meant because he was a German. And it plays on our innermost secret desires. Do you see one thing Surrealism is doing? It's trying to go back to the latent, right? The innermost secret desires, and make them more blatant, make them come to the surface. You know, pull that from the unconscious, pull it up. So that is what they felt all these movements of order, like constructivism, precisionism, Bauhaus, and Mondrian weren't doing. They weren't drawing from the unconscious. So you can see for yourself the idea of surreal poetry of the unconscious versus the protest of Dada. And that, I think, if you can address the differences between them, the anti-quality of Dada, the opening to the unconscious of the surrealist, you will get a much better ability to handle whatever comes up, you know, between those movements. And this is his work, Little Nightingales, sends everybody amok and sends them into hysterics. Magritte. Magritte is our kind of secret spy or secret agent man. What he's subverting is our sense of well-being in the world of ordered systems that we've invented, like language, to make sense of things. He's constantly showing us the world as a kind of enigma that rational mind alone cannot explain. So his pictures are all puzzles. Like this one, a puzzle of a sort of crime, a sex murder crime, but we don't know who did it, and we can't solve it, and it sort of points to the little murders we all commit in our unconscious, the little envious moments we have, the little things of the psyche that go on. But in a way, we can't ever really solve. These are all pictures with no one solution, and certainly no rational solution. So the world itself is going beyond the rational mindset. So that's the Menaced Assassin. Cécile Paz-Pete is his work called The Treachery of Images. So she's telling us how images, we tend to look at them, forgetting that they, especially when they're this representational, that they are sign systems. That a word or an image is a sign system. And sign systems are not the same thing as the things they describe. His pictures are never quite the same as what they represent. He's showing you the limits of representation, the limits of reality in that sense. And he constantly makes us think, the world out there that we take for granted, or the world that we think we're perceiving, the world that we assume is out there, how much is it really out there? And how much are we conceiving of it within our mind's eye? How much do we actually, how much is reality the stuff of which dreams are made? How much is our sense of reality actually a dream of reality? What is reality? But I can't, if you get me going, then I can't sleep. All right, so what we have is this pipe that looks so much like a pipe, and yet he tells us it's not a pipe. So you have to think about how the signifier does not equal the signified. How the, you can't smoke it. So in that sense, of course, it's not an actual pipe. But what we start to see is how unreliable science systems are. How there's an artificiality to them, to words. There's nothing in the word that contains the meaning. Pipe is that word could have been the word for hair. You know, I mean, it didn't have to be. It's all cultural agreement. So what we start to see is how elusive the world really is and how elusive reality is. So you can think about those. And the key of dreams is when the signifier and the signified match up and they don't meet, they don't equal. There it is in English. His eye picture, which is called the false mirror, suggests again that the world out there is not necessarily out there, that it's always kind of constructed within the mind's eye, within the inner world, how we see things, how we choose to look at things. So it's not really a mimetic. It's very interesting. He uses a representational style And he never distorts. He never distorts the subjects. What he shows you is the weirdness in the system of things, the slippage in the system of things, the system of language, even the system of representation. So his works really make us question what we see, what we think of reality, and they really are about these ideas of what we take for granted about reality. The false mirror puts us right back to questioning pictures from the reverse side of the eye. And then the other one, which is the human condition, how we want to see images and the thing matching up, but how there is a slippage constantly between them, and he reminds us of that. The rape we've already discussed in terms of Freudian dream logic, and you can still play that with things like philosophy and boudoir, or personal values, where your personal stuff takes on more value and seems to grow in importance. Notice the outside world comes inside the wallpaper. Finally, we then move on to Dali. Hello, Dali. Salvador Dali. Now, I started to talk about some different terminology that's down there in your sheet, Renee Magritte, the lucid dream technique. It looks like a lucid dream, like it's a real clear-cut dream, but what is being described is something you can't, is a slip of the mind, is a trick of the mind. With Dali, we get what we call painted dreams with an emphasis on the product, kind of a simple product, to depict it. Very influenced by Freudian kinds of symbols. So that's going to be different from dream painting, where the emphasis is on the process, where you put yourself into a psychic automatous state. You can't be in a psychic automatous state and paint with this much precision. But notice all the precision in the world in Magritte's paintings and in Dali's paintings do not lead to reassurance. It leads to more questions. So, you know, it's this thing where the rational mind alone cannot solve it and resolve it. This is his accommodations of desire, so he's talking about the anatomy of desire. He's using Freudian dream logic with displacements and condensations, and he fetishizes the lion as the father figure. So you can see Dali's iconography at work. His work is, he does distort the shape of things. At times things go limp, things go hard, things become formless. And that's scary because it's like our classification for things. When you're on the exam, you think, okay, I've got it all clear cut. This is what this means and this is what that means. And then you start to just go into a swoon and it all slips away. That's that slippage where these categories no longer hold. So with Dali, you start to get a nightmarish reality again and again. It shows you the world of the sexual persecution. It's the dark side of the surreal marvelous. This is the lugubrious game, the mournful game. We see all kinds of phallic compensations, the hand, depression, looking away. We see the Dali face in profile with the bug at the mouth, which is like fears of being overwhelmed, swallowed, sexual persecution fears. And then we have the man getting quite excited about the whole thing. That so much of it being played on the idea of fears of castration. This is the time period when Dali said, there's so much sexual persecution that the only safety is in masturbation. And I do it as often as I can. So hence the great masturbator. The years for all of the surrealism, 1925 to 30, will do. What I want you to see in the great masturbator is how it plays with that profile face, with that iconography from Dali. How the face goes from hard to soft, how you have these metamorphoses, these shifts. There's a lot of biomorphic distortions in Dali. And that is that play of the slippage. This one dealing with fears, again, of persecution of the bug at the mouth, the fear of being devoured, the fear of being overwhelmed, the fear of going limp. It is so the opposite of an underlying order. This underlying disturbance in Dali again and again has to do with the slippage into the formless. The slippage into something that can't be easily categorized. The slippage into things that defy an ordered explanation. And we get that with the persistence of memory, where memory and time isn't measured chronologically or according to us outer clocks. It's toward your inner clock. Your memory, it has no laws of chronology. It persists. It keeps coming back up. So it operates according to the laws of desire. Oh, there's a good one for you to think about. Dada is the laws of chance. Surrealism is the laws of desire, right? Then you get a sense of the psychological side of Dada. You know, I'm throwing out a lot of stuff at you because it can stick for you in different ways. You might hear this and get an idea of how you think of these movements in one way. Somebody else will take another way. It's not like you have to memorize a certain kind of list. You need to be able to think it, wrap your mind around it yourself. So here we see things go from hard to water, and then these watches going limp. So a very provocative landscape that is really, truly more of a mindscape. The paranoid critical method was his method for seeing like a paranoid schizophrenic, where you see more than the rest of the people, you see between the lines, you see the latent. So once again, it's looking for that innermost secret desire, the latent, bringing it to the surface. And that's when you see something like The Invisible Man. And it's all a flip, once again, of how you're looking at something. The Angelou by Dali, the Gala and Angelou Malay, immediately preceding the arrival of the iconic anamorphoses, plays with even something as innocent as this. Dali thinks works of art have their own unconscious. And that the unconscious of this is an erotic way in which the man plunges his phallic fork into Mother Earth, so he sees her as being a sexual connotation. So looking for the subtext and bringing that forward. And then finally, his response to the Spanish Civil War, soft construction with world beings, a body turned against itself, a body in bits and pieces, a body that reminds us now, getting close to World War II, of trench foot. You know, this is the persistence of memory. Surrealism has not forgotten the horrors of World War I. So all these other movements trying to build a brave new world, utopia, look forward, work with the machine, they keep reminding us of this other irrational side to human nature. Now, important that you do, Miro came at the end, he's another Spanish artist, he's important in terms of dream painting, because he's the first one giving us more abstract surrealism. And I want you to think, I mean, the question is, can you really depict the unconscious in this kind of old master, miniature kind of precisionist academic style that Dali does? I think it's kind of marvelous. He takes the academic style and pushes it against itself. But according to someone like Miro, the unconscious is too abstract a place. That's why it's unconscious. So it has to be like a secret language. So he has moved away from naturalism to something where this stands for tree in this painting of the hunter. Just a stick figure for the hunter. Just notations, as if the unconscious keeps traces of what happens to us in an abstract kind of language, picture sign language. So this is his idea of the unconscious as a picture sign language. And you have to abstract to get there. So he gives us also, I want you to connect with him, the idea of psychic automatism. He really is putting himself in a dreamlike state. He's not calculating it all consciously. He's letting it come to him in a kind of receptive, dreamlike state. And his pictures end up very biomorphic, with a feeling of kind of an animated life force all over the screen. If Dali sees the world as nightmarish, full of sexual persecution, Miro sees the world as full of the marvelous, as full of kind of whimsy, as full of a kind of eroticism that is unbounded. So remember too, he said of the Cubists, I'm going to break their guitar. So everything is more organic and more flowing in all these different directions in a kind of all over picture. But look how abstract he gets it. And to help you remember, he sees it as an abstract language. He's the one, his ideas are the ones that kind of transfer to the New York school following the war. So surrealism in New York and pictures like Miro's pictures are a great influence of Jackson Pollock after. You can see how abstract expressionism has been brought to that. This is a very large canvas, by the way, like 6 by 8 feet. And it all starts with a blackberry jam, an accident, and from that he makes this picture, I think, of the unconscious. And it's a much more abstract place than the way Dali sees it. He does start with machines here, but in surrealism, machines are desiring machines. So it's not a machine aesthetic, they're desiring machines. And so he plays off of them, and look at this biomorphic abstraction. He only calls it painting. So it's just highly suggestive shapes, and it was all started as a collage of machines, and this is what he makes out of them. So you let the desire go. That's psychic automatism. Undirected play of thought leads to desire. And finally, a picture where you look right through him. You see this transparency of the artist, the end of kind of representational work. Later, his other self-portraits will just pick up the star and the sun in his eyes. So he creates this abstract language from his earlier, more naturalistic works of art. And a last work by him, a beautiful bird revealing the unknown to a pair of lovers. All over Eros, all over whimsy. Beautiful bird going by, and there's our woman with her flaming vulva, all heightened. So it's his secret sign language, his little iconography of how the unconscious works. And the whole picture he called a kind of constellation picture with musical fillers, this line play. So that all over activity is what our Jackson Pollock people will pick up on later. Psychic automatism, they pick up on that. So this is the conduit, this is the kind of connection to that later group. And you can see it's a much more abstract language than a Dali would use. It's also full of whimsy, despite the fact it's World War II by this point. You can say 1925 to 30 for all of this. This is just a late one.